Thank you. I wish, with the agreement of the House, to share my time with my colleague Deputy John O'Sullivan and with Deputy Kevin O'Callaghan.
Deputy, move.
I formally move the bill that's in my name, the Institutional Child Abuse Bill 2009. I move second stage.
Thanks, Deputy.
Colleagues in this House, this is, whatever about the previous debate, not a debate in which party division or rancour should inform our discourse, because this is something for which we all bear some responsibility and something for which we all have an obligation to the survivors and the victims and to their children. I think it's fair to say, and certainly I can't recall anything in recent times that had such an impact as the findings of the Ryan Commission. It shocked the nation. It shocked a nation that thought it had got beyond being shocked. The 43 conclusions in the executive summary are frankly quite unreal and horrific when you read them in the cold light of day. But to hear the anguished voices of those people who are the subjects of the testimony that they gave and to listen to their stories is one that makes us all ashamed, and therefore puts upon all of us an obligation to listen to reach out, and where possible to respond to many of the concerns that they have expressed to us in the light of the findings of that report, in the light of its 43 conclusions, and specifically in the light of the 21 recommendations that the report came to at the end after 5 volumes of testimony and analysis. The Labour Party has studied the Ryan report and its recommendations. We have listened to the survivors and to the children of those who were sent to these institutions and who indeed are no longer alive. There were some issues that are outside the scope of the original legislation, that is, the Residential Institutions Redress Act of 2002, which we believe now need to be addressed. And it is for that reason that we have published our bill, the Institutional Child Abuse Bill 2009, to make amends to the victims of abuse. We earnestly hope, and I welcome in the House now the Minister for Education and Science, we earnestly hope that the bill will not be opposed by Fianna Fáil and the Green Party. We do not wish to divide this House on this issue. There are many ways in which this bill can be taken on board. We all know the fate of private members' bills that are accepted at second stage. Some of them do surface in due course, amended by the government of the day, and are enacted into legislation. Others have to linger, but at least they have the credibility of not being voted down. And I know that vote will not take place until tomorrow evening, but I understand that it is the intention of the government, as of now, to so vote it down. And I would earnestly, in the spirit of comradeship to you, Minister, here present, to think again about that particular course of action. We owe it to ourselves, and specifically to the victims who are right across the country, some of whom are in the gallery tonight. What does this bill propose to do? Basically, we've identified 7 areas in which we believe action is necessary and action is required. The first is to expand the definitions of child and institution so that no victim of abuse is denied justice through the Redress Board. A small but substantial number of people were previously excluded from the Redress Board because of the wording of the 2002 Act. This change ensures that this is no longer the case if the bill is accepted. The second expands the definition of child and institution in the bill, which necessitates a new time period for new applications to the Redress Board. In short, that's when we change the definition of adult from the age of 21 to the age of 18. People were deemed to be children during the time in which they were incarcerated in these institutions because they were under the age of 21. But because we moved the voting age and other definitions of childhood and adulthood, they were no longer retrospectively deemed to be children, even though at that point in time and in their point in time they were so deemed. That is an anomaly that needs to be addressed, and our bill addresses that anomaly. Thirdly, the bill will abolish the obligation of secrecy, which effectively prohibited applications to the Redress Board from talking about their childhood and time in the institutions. My God, what kind of a country do you think we're living in? You can't talk about your childhood or your experience in institutions. That's straight out of Tiananmen Square in the People's Republic of China and Russia and other dictatorial states. Prohibited in law, citizens of this republic are not allowed from talking about their childhood and their time in Irish institutions. It has no place in Irish legislation, and it should be reformed. Fourthly, the bill proposes that persons who were detained in reformatory schools under criminal convictions must be treated for all purposes in law as not guilty of an offence. Their records will be wiped clean. Now, this is important for a variety of reasons, and it's important that we understand what it is we're trying to do. We cannot, nor will we try to rewrite history. So the conclusions of the courts and the records of the courts have to stand for future generations to see what shame we brought upon ourselves in the name of the Irish Republic. And we, the Labour Party, are not proposing that we would retrospectively correct the historical record. But we are saying that we would amend the impact of that historical record to the point that, as in from the enactment of this legislation, no person so charged, so recorded, so convicted, so dispersed from a court to an institution would be deemed then or now to have been a criminal, irrespective of what the historical record would have said. That's what we're looking for. And it is a cultural change, not a factual change, and it is a just change, and we should do it without altering or changing the historical record. And that record is itself so important. When you read the 5 volumes, and I haven't read them all because, quite frankly, I don't know if I have the courage or the capacity to read them all. But the bits I have read are such that no matter how horrific they are, the last thing that ever should happen to them is that they be destroyed. The last thing that ever should occur to them is that they should disappear, as some files have disappeared in the Department of Education and Science. The last thing that this republic should ever be able to say is that not only did we abuse those victims, but we bury their past as well. So every record, every testimony, every word of anguish, carefully and painfully conveyed in that system that was constructed, that has been so described by some of the survivors, should in whatever way at least be preserved. Let it be for other people and for other generations to decide how best to convey that. But no survivor and no child of a survivor should be able to say there is no record of what they said or what they experienced. That's like having a relative with no grave. That's like having somebody who is among the disappeared because their record has disappeared, because we would allow, or the minister would allow, the records of their testimony to be destroyed. It is the minister who has that power. We want that power to be shared with this House so as to ensure that no such destroyal can take place unless this House agrees to, and I don't think that we would. The 6th thing among the 7 that we propose to do is that the bill should open up the 2002 indemnity deal to freedom of information requests. All legal privilege and confidentiality will be waived by the state if the bill is passed. This was part of the condition, this was part of the sordid deal that was done between contracting parties as this thing passed through from Justice Lafoy to Justice Ryan. It was a shoddy deal, and it should be removed. If it is removed, it will allow the records of the 2002 indemnity agreement with the 18 religious teaching orders to be published in full. The culture of deferment, to which conclusion 3 in the executive summary refers specifically in the Department of Education, is a thing of the past. It is a thing of the past, and it is a healthy thing that should be buried in the past, because it will not inform any citizen of this republic going into the future of this state as we march into this century. It guarantees that any proposed amendment to the indemnity deal will have to be laid before the Houses of the Oireachtas and subject to its approval. And finally, the 7th key proposal in this legislation. There are many other minor points, but this is the 7 key ones in the interest of the House I'm articulating. It will enable an audit of the religious orders' assets. The bill confers power on the government to appoint an auditor to examine the financial affairs of the 18 religious orders who signed the 2002 indemnity agreement. And this will allow the government to assess the true wealth of the religious orders for future renegotiation of the 2002 agreement. Now, my colleague Deputy Pat Rabbitte, who has finished his tour of duty on the Justice Bill and has just left the House, perhaps pioneered the questioning on behalf of the Labour Party, and indeed on behalf of the citizens of this Republic, of the shoddy deal that was done in secret by former Minister Dr. Woods, and let it be said by the then Secretary-General of the Department of Education and Science, now since retired, and I presume I can refer to his name, but if we can refer to T.K. Whittaker in such terms, we can refer to others, Mr. Dennehy. That was a shoddy deal. The Department of Finance suggested that the burden, and it was not easy to calculate what the approximate cost might be, but in principle they said it should be 50-50, evenly shared. What we got was 10% to the religious orders and 90% to the taxpayer. That has to be reopened. Now, I know that the Taoiseach, and I believe the Minister for Education and Science was present with them when, after the debate on the Ryan report some weeks ago, met with the representatives of the 18 religious orders. And such a request has been made, and in the response which the Minister no doubt would make, hopefully at some stage, he might perhaps just address that particular matter and confirm to the House my understanding, as reported in the media, that in fact the Taoiseach did actually request such an audit to be undertaken by the religious congregations, so as to see what contribution they can make from their own resources. Now, let me say one thing about this, and I am the product of the religious teaching orders. I'm the very proud graduate of a wonderful education that I got from the Holy Ghost Fathers in St. Michael's School and Blackrock College, as they were there. And I have never resigned from that. And to my final dying days, I will be eternally grateful for the love, affection, and erudition, and leadership, education that I got from those men. I have no desire, and the Labour Party has no desire, to impoverish the religious teaching orders. God knows they are now at a stage in their life, having made an incredible contribution to this country, where their big concern is caring for the elderly in their community. And they don't have children or grandchildren who can look after the nursing home care. And they don't have the support that we have in old age, or that we give to our parents in old age. And they are entitled to it. And I'm saying, insofar as they need resources to have a decent dignity in their declining years, such as we would want for our own parents and uncles and aunts, they should have that. But let them have that at the expense of the taxpayer, and not at the sale and the dispersal of the educational infrastructure and other institutions and buildings which they have across this country. Let not the so-called financial and legal advisors advise them to dispose of their assets so that they can care for their community and their sick and elderly members, to whom they obviously have an obligation. Let that not be the outcome. And if there are spare resources there, let that come into the pot towards the 50-50 deal. But if there isn't such a resource, and I'm open to this question, but I suspect that there isn't. But if there isn't such a resource, let us not allow the sale of infrastructure paid for by the Irish taxpayer and by Catholic citizens in the main who contributed voluntarily to these construction of these edifices for the last 100 years or so. That's not what the Labour Party is about. That's not what I'm about. This is a public infrastructure that belongs to the community and should not disappear. Now, the reason why I'm so passionate about it, and the Minister has heard me say it before, 2 secondary schools in the constituency of Dublin South East, under the control of religious teaching orders, disappeared without any reference to the parents, without a say-so to anybody involved, with minimal notice to the teachers, and with no forward planning for the parents of those children. And 1 primary school under religious order control, and 2 other primary schools under diocesan control. Did it for their own reasons. We understand the reasons, but those reasons are no longer sufficient when, with 500,000 primary school kids in our system at the moment, and another 100,000 expected within 10 years, we simply cannot allow that infrastructure to disappear. So that's why I have been so strong about this particular argument. And I want to reassess again. I am the product of fine education from those religious teaching orders. I salute them and I'm thankful to it, and I've said it many, many times before. This is not about some kind of vindictive chase against them to try and impoverish those orders. This is about enriching our community and celebrating the contribution that the vast majority of them have made to our society. One of the conclusions and recommendations in the report is that there should be, well, before I turn to that, let me just quickly address one other issue, and that is there are some issues that have been brought to our attention, including the experience of the women who were in the Magdalene laundries. This bill does not address that, and there are reasons that some of my colleagues will go into later on as to why. There are technical and legal reasons. That's not to say for one moment that the experience was horrendous and is a past that should not be buried. But there are explanations and there are reasons which time prevents me from elaborating upon. But there are other issues, such as the Magdalene and others, because it wasn't just the state and religious teaching orders. There was a culture in some of our families, from wherever it originated, that denied the existence of daughters who became pregnant outside marriage and who hunted them out of the home and in some cases out of the country. I'm ashamed of that. We all should be ashamed of it. We have addressed it in the present, but it didn't happen for some people who were born on this island, and they suffered a great hurt as a result. And we all know that. We all know that. And I don't know if legislation per se along the redress board form can deal with that. But we should nevertheless recognise that it did happen. Finally, Alaskan Corla, one of the first recommendations, second recommendations in the executive summary of the report from Ryan was that there should be a monument. I don't think that goes far enough. I think there should be a museum. I think there should be a museum that will contain the records and the history and the experience and the voices and the sounds of those people who were victims, so that they can explain why, having lost their childhood, they could never behave and live as full adults to their own children. So that grandchildren could understand why grandmother or grandfather wasn't as others were, or had black days that were inexplicable to a young child. We need that permanent memory to be kept there from the past, so we never allow it to occur again in the future. Because forgetfulness is the enemy of such an insurity for the future. And I have a suggestion for this House, and I'll conclude at this point. As part of the contribution from the Christian Brothers, a property called Coloshtawira in Parnell Square was contributed as part of the 10% contribution to the state. It's currently under the management of the OPW. No use has been found for it. It's up at the top of Parnell Square, beside the Hugh Lane Gallery and in front of the Garden of Remembrance, part of the cultural sector, if you like, of Dublin City. Between the splendour of the art collection of the Hugh Lane Gallery and the inspirational heroism and martyrdom of the 1916 insurrection, I think we should have a museum to ourselves, about ourselves, so that future children will realise this wasn't some foreign invasion. These weren't the Vikings. This wasn't some Anglo-Saxon invasion. This wasn't Cromwell. This was us, you, me, and every other citizen in this country who allowed these things to happen, and in our name, under our state. And that never again can it happen.
1 minute.
Never again can it happen. And so I would take the proposal of the monument and turn it into a museum, and locate that museum not down somewhere down the country where it would be hard to access, like Letterfrack was virtually impossible to access, or Dangan, but right in the centre of this capital city, within 500 metres of the GPO, that icon of insurrection, to say, yes, we did some glorious things in this republic, but we did things of which we should be ashamed and which we should ensure will never, ever occur again.